part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole. So, for the month of July, we wanted to talk about some big blockbuster movies that deal with history, even though they're not actually period dramas. If this is something that people have liked us doing, we could definitely do more things like this in the future. I think we could, maybe do like a Da Vinci Code episode or something.
I had an idea while we were watching this.
Oh, perfect. I think there's other movies like this that sort of aren't actual period dramas, but do deal with history that if people have liked this, please let us know on social media and we can continue this. But in any case, we started with National Treasure. So naturally, now we're going to talk about Night at the Museum. And no, not just because I'm that obsessed with Mobius on the Loki show and I want to do an Owen Wilson movie. What are you talking about? That's not why we're doing this.
That's exactly why we're doing this. Don't lie. I'm so excited that we chose this. Night at the Museum feels like it's been around for our entire lives. And actually, it kind of was. So I actually found out that Night at the Museum is based on the 1993 children's book, also called The Night at the Museum, which was written by Croatian illustrator Milan Trink, which I did not know that. I learned that while researching for this episode. The screenplay was written by Thomas Lennon and Robert Ben Garant and directed by Sean Levy. The film came out just in time for Christmas in 2006. It was the first of an eventual trilogy of films following the night watchman Larry's adventures with the magic of the museum. The movie stars Ben Stiller, Robin Williams, Rami Malek, Owen Wilson, Ricky Gervais, Dick Van Dyke, and so many more.
So many people.
Like our discovery about National Treasure, a remake is in development for Night at the Museum at Disney Plus, and I am very disappointed that they have not asked for my opinions. Because I have many.
I love that. So I had not seen this movie since at least high school, if not before then. I'm almost positive I saw this in the movie theater whenever it came out. Yeah. Which obviously was quite a while ago. And
a few years.
I did not remember things in this movie. Like, I remembered a lot of it. But, for example, I didn't know Paul Rudd was in this. So when he,
the exact same revelation.
When he walked in that doorway, I was like, Paul Rudd? I wasn't ready for him.
Also, can we just talk about the evolution of phones in a short period of time? Because
yes.
it was like 2007.
Yes.
It wasn't that long ago.
Yep. Also, it definitely hits a little bit different now, like seeing Robin Williams in this. It made me sad. Made me very sad. Owen Wilson is a damn delight in this movie. He's so funny. He's so good. I love him so much. And I will say that I was like, God, I feel like whenever I first saw this as like a kid, I guess I would have been in like 6th grade whenever it came out. I feel like I remember like having a little bit of a thing for Jedidah, Owen Wilson's character, and I watched it again and I was like, oh no, yeah, I definitely did. We love Jedidah and his boyfriend. But I also have got to say, when his son asks him, Ben Stiller's character's son asks him, what if you're wrong and you're just an ordinary guy who should get a job? I was like, oh my God, like, that's a burn.
Brutal.
Like, yeah, I was like, frankly, I don't need to hear that question asked right now. Even if you're not asking me, I don't want to hear it asked in front of me. But also, another line that really kind of cracked me up was when Rebecca, who's like a docent, but is doing her PhD, is like, I'm never going to know who she really was, so I think it's time I moved on to a different subject. Like, ma'am, no, that's just how being a historian works. Like, you research dead people. You're never going to really know them.
No.
I was like, okay, so you're in the wrong field. Like, if you want to know people.
Tell me tell me that somebody who's never worked in museums wrote this screenplay without telling me somebody who never worked in museums wrote it.
We could do that all day, but
this is why I'm saying, ask me to help with the movie, Disney, because I know a thing or two about museums, and I also know a thing or two about weird things that happen in museums.
Yep. It does, I think it's a really fun movie, and it actually does hold up surprisingly well. There are parts of it. I'm not a huge fan of Ben Stiller, which would probably shock no one who knows anything about my taste. And some of the humor in it I find a little annoying.
Are you talking about Dexter?
Yes, I literally am talking about Dexter.
Dexter's arc does not get any better over the 3 movies. Neither does his Your Nation arc.
No, that stuff I was like, I could leave this. Everything else I was actually like pretty.
It's such like bad boy humor.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't have to be this way. I consistently think about, I think it's in the 3rd movie when Dexter pees on Jedidah and Octavius and puts out the fire of Pompeii, which is hilarious, but also like, ugh,
but also really? Like, please no. And I think that's the kind of thing where like, if that happened once,
it's a running joke.
I can move on, but it's a running joke.
Okay, and the monkey is wax. Why is he peeing?
Why is a wax monkey peeing? So yeah, I think that, some of the humor definitely works. Like all the stuff with like Jedidah and Octavius. Some I will say, like, one of the things that doesn't hold up maybe as well is some of the like jokes around language. Just feel like we're just on the edge of racist.
And then there's like the whole Teddy Roosevelt Sacagawea thing, which is also a running thing through all 3 movies.
It's a little weird. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know how to feel about it.
I feel like it toes the line.
Right. Because it is a weird thing of like, I think that goes back to, are we supposed to accept the people in it as any sort of incarnation of the person that they are based on?
And I mean, Teddy has that whole line.
Yeah.
Where he's like, I'm just a wax figure. I didn't do any of those things.
Exactly. Which I think does make it better, but I feel like they maybe
that's where it like toes that line.
But I think they maybe don't do enough of a good job of like making him seem like he is distinctly not Teddy Roosevelt. And she is not Sacagawea. Yeah. So yeah, I do feel like there's maybe some flaws in the concept of this in terms of that, but overall it holds up better than I would have expected it to, frankly. So I was happy.
Yeah, I love the Night at the Museum franchise. It is actually one of my comfort trilogies. My mom and I watch it like every time it's on TV, and it is like constantly on TNT. Specifically 2 and 3. Those seem to be on TV far more often than the original. And so I think I've seen this one the least. I've definitely seen Dan Stevens far more often. The last Night at the Museum, I think, is my favorite. Also because there's the whole hilarious like Hugh Jackman cameo in Camelot, which is like the funniest bit. I love that tremendously. So this one felt a little bit new again, because it's probably been like 3 or 4 years since I've watched it. So it was fun to revisit it. I too had completely forgotten that Paul Rudd was in it. I was like, oh, right, he's in this movie. So lovable, so darling. Also, the woman that gets him the job at the museum is Ben Stiller's mother. So contrary to what Ben Stiller may be saying on Twitter, both of his parents are very famous.
Yeah, I thought that he wasn't. He didn't come from famous parents.
He's not a common man. No. He has a very famous mom and a very famous dad. But I just want to make it very clear for our listeners that this is a Jedidah and Octavius appreciation zone.
It is.
Once again, now as an adult, I am very amused by the "I ain't quitting you" line, because
incredible.
Y'all did not have to quote Brokeback Mountain.
But they did. But they did have
to. They did that for us.
I actually think this is one of the most interesting examples of a movie queer coding characters in a time where, particularly in a children's film, they couldn't have had 2 characters that were explicitly gay and gotten by with it. Sort of like it's similar, I think, to if you think about like the character of Ryan in the High School Musical movies,
Yes.
and how he's very clearly gay coded, but Kenny Ortega has talked about the fact that he wanted to make him explicitly gay and Disney wouldn't let him. I genuinely wonder if the screenwriters wanted to make them openly gay.
And it doesn't feel like offensive. You know, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like queerbaiting.
Queerbaity, yeah. No, because they're in love.
They're very clearly in love. It's enemies to lovers too. Like, that's what's beautiful.
I literally was I may by the time this podcast goes up, I will probably have already done this. I think I'm gonna have to tweet like the best enemies to lovers ship is Jedidah and
I will hit retweet
Octavius.
On that so fast because it is so true, especially with the arc between the 3 movies. Like, the 3rd movie is so good because like they hold hands when they think they're gonna, like, after they think they were gonna die. It's beautiful, and they think they're gonna die together, and it's great. It's beautiful.
Your OTP could never.
Your OTP could never. Jedidah and Octavius are actually the blueprint for all enemies to lovers ships.
They actually are. They are the blueprint.
They are. That's just the facts. So while I was watching this, specifically when we get to the point when Rami Malek appears, my beautiful boy, I love him so much. I would like us to do The Mummy.
Yes.
Have you seen it?
No.
Oh my god, I knew.
Okay, so this is actually funny though.
Definitely not seen The Mummy.
This is funny because literally for the past like 3 months, my sister and I have been talking about how much we need to watch The Mummy. Mostly because like one of my favorite. This is gonna sound so funny, but one of my favorite rides in the whole world is the Mummy ride at Universal in Orlando. And my sister is now a little bit obsessed with Rachel Weisz. Because
as she should be,
right, as you should, but because of Black Widow. So we've been talking about watching it. So I would love to do an episode on The Mummy.
Let's do a bonus episode.
Works for me.
If you're gonna watch it, that's like one of my favorite movies. I think that we should do that.
We're decided it. Y'all are here in our process real time.
Yeah, because it's such a good movie, and like there was something somebody said that I was like, oh, this is very similar humor to some of the stuff in The Mummy. Wonderful movie. But yeah, there's so many fun lines in Night at the Museum. Obviously the I Ain't Quitting You like just cracked me up because it's clearly Brokeback Mountain. But the Relax, I'm Wax. I feel like only Robin Williams could deliver that line. And again, like, yes, like you said, this movie made me very sad because of Robin Williams. But at least it doesn't have the line that he has in the final one of the Night at the Museum movies that literally is going around TikTok right now as a sound. And every time I start to hear it, I have to skip past it because I literally bawled like a baby in the movie theaters because I saw this movie and I saw the 3rd movie in theaters, and it was like 2 weeks after Robin Williams had died. And like those lines that he utters are just, they're like the last ones that he says in live action. So that made me really sad. Yep. Luckily this one doesn't make me as sad, and the middle one doesn't make me as sad, but I think the middle one is my favorite because it has Amelia Earhart.
Yes.
I know I just said I like Dan Stevens, but I do like the middle one because it's the Smithsonian.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That makes sense.
But you're going to tell us some things about the American Museum of Natural History now, right?
I am actually. So I decided for one of my topics today to look at the actual history of the American Museum of Natural History. To start off, a few facts about it that I thought were interesting. It is a center both for education and research, and about 200 scientists at a time are working on research through the museum. It also has the Richard Gilder Graduate School, which is the only American museum that can award PhDs and masters in teaching degrees, which is fascinating. Yeah, I did not know that before I did this research. In a normal non-COVID time, I saw they have about 5 million people visit yearly. And they also have exhibits on 5 continents, which is pretty cool. The museum was actually a pioneer in creating dioramas and lifelike exhibitions to show animal and plant life in their habitat, as we see in the movie. But it was founded in 1869 when Albert Smith Bickmore's proposal was accepted by the city. And it had the support of a lot of different businessmen, including William E. Dodge Jr., Theodore Roosevelt Sr., Teddy Roosevelt's father, and J.P. Morgan, who you might know.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. And on April 6th of that year, Governor John Thompson Hoffman signed the Act of Incorporation to officially create the museum. Its first president was John David Wolfe. So in 1871, a couple of years later, the first set of exhibits opened. Their original location was actually the Central Park Arsenal. And it wasn't until 1872, under the presidency of Robert L. Stewart, the museum bought Manhattan Square to build a bigger museum. And they started with a small building, but the architect went ahead and made plans for more. And in 1877, a new Victorian Gothic building opened with the President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes, presiding over the ceremony. And today you can't really see that original Victorian Gothic building because it's sort of hidden from view within like the complex. The building was expanded several times to reach its current size, which is sort of a mammoth. But from 1880 to 1930, what's really interesting is the museum was actually involved in a lot of exploration and a lot of expeditions. They sent people to the North Pole, to Siberia, to the Congo, and really it wasn't, I think we think oftentimes of museums as being sort of more passive in how they acquire their collections. Somebody brings things to them or they bid on things at auction, but they actually were sending researchers out into the field, which I think is really interesting. The Jessup North Pacific expedition from 1897 to 1902 was the most ambitious one of its type ever taken, and it cataloged the life of people and the culture of the people in the North Pacific. In 1913, Carl Akeley wrote to President Osborne of the museum to offer to work for 5 years on the creation of the African Mammals Hall. Akeley was a pioneer in the creation of these lifelike animal dioramas that we see in the movie that are in the museum today, and so he is sort of the reason that this museum was really the greatest pioneer of them. They had another, in the 1920s, they had the Central Asiatic expeditions through Mongolia, which found really important dinosaur fossils there that they were able to bring back. In 1930, their first major mammal habitat diorama opened, and they continued expanding them from there. The Hall of Ocean Life opened on the first floor in 1933, and it was then renovated in 1969 to include the famous blue whale that is suspended from the ceiling. I did hear that during the past year, they were actually using the museum as a vaccination site at one point, and you could essentially get vaccinated against COVID under the blue whale. Which, as much as I'm glad I was not in New York City for the pandemic, that would have been pretty cool. The Hayden Planetarium opened in 1935, and then the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Hall and Rotunda opened in 1936. Per the reason that the museum has the Theodore Roosevelt theming to it and memorial there is because not only was, he from New York and very involved in New York and obviously held positions in the government in New York, but he was very dedicated to conservation and to exploring wildlife and learning more about wildlife and plants and animal species. So it's very fitting that he is a character in the museum in this movie. After artists and scientists were actually sent to Africa to sketch, photograph, measure, collect things, the Akeley Hall of African Mammals opened in 1942. What's interesting is in 1967, the museum exterior was designated an official New York City landmark, but later actually some interior parts of the museum were also dedicated as interior landmarks. It's interesting that those two things are separate. But it has continued to expand and be renovated and have new things open ever since. They are one of those museums that is sort of constantly turning over and opening new things. But a lot of it does sort of date back to, some of the original halls are still there in there, even if they might be called slightly different names. What I thought was interesting is they actually did host the premiere of Night at the Museum in 2006. And afterwards started a family program of sleepovers, essentially, that were Night at the Museum themed, where families with kids between the ages of 6 and 12 could come and spend the night in the museum overnight. because of this movie, which I think is kind of interesting. And this movie actually did drive a lot of traffic to the museum for a while after it came out, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, after the Smithsonian was featured in the second movie for Battle for the Smithsonian, they also started doing the Night at the Museum themed sleepovers, which I am envious of because I am neither a child nor do I have children to participate in that. But I feel like once you've slept at a museum, you kind of slept at the mall, and I have slept in a museum before,
there you go.
I've got the experience, and sometimes things do come to life. I'm just saying. So for my topic today, I wanted to talk about the Easter Island statue. You dum-dum, give me gum-gum. So originally Nicole had been like, ooh, I'll do this. And I was like, actually, I will be taking that from you. Because I have had a really interesting fascination in Easter Island head statues since I was like a very young child. My mom said that when we first went to see the Smithsonian when we were still living in Maryland, so it was before we had moved to Virginia, so I was under 3, I like instantly gravitated towards the Easter Island head that they have at the Smithsonian, and I have pictures with it. I've just been like very oddly entranced by the Easter Island head, so I was like, yes, I want to talk about this because obviously it plays a central part in Night at the Museum. So Easter Island is actually known as Rapa Nui. It is 2,000 miles west of the Chilean coast. The Easter Island heads are actually known as moai to the natives of the island. They are said to be the Aringa Ora, or the living faces of their ancestors. The island is famous for its rows of moai, which were carved from volcanic tuff rock from local quarries and then moved to platforms, which are called ahu, which are then placed along the water's edge, which with a concentration of them along Easter Island's southeast coast. The figure, which is seen in the Night at the Museum, which is housed in New York City, is actually a mold that was made during one of the expeditions that Nicole was talking about when they sent researchers to Rapa Nui from 1934 to 1935. So it is not actually a stone from the island, but a replica. There are 887 moai on Rapa Nui, where they are very much revered and even considered to some of the islanders as very sacred. On average, they stand at about 13 feet high and weigh 14 tons. Ahu Tagariki, the largest moai on the island, stands at 72 feet tall. While researching this, and the figure that is at the American Museum of Natural History, I learned that the British Museum actually has 2 original moai that they took from the island.
Classic.
The British Museum explains that the figures are called Hoya Hakanaya, which translates to stolen friend, which makes me wonder if that's actually what the islanders were saying they were called, or if they were saying that they were stealing their ancestors as they took it. Yeah, complicated feelings there. But what I think is really interesting about the moai is that there is really, I don't even know if it's a heated debate among historians, but there's really no general consensus on how old they are. Between ethnographers, anthropologists, archaeologists, historians, I've seen varying dates. And I think part of this is because ethnographers say when they reached the island in the 1700s, that's when first contact more or less was made by white historians and those that were trying to understand these far-reaching areas. They claimed that the culture was dying on the island, which I don't really know if I trust, but that the people that they encountered didn't know a lot about the moai, which again, I also find that I can't completely trust because obviously they know enough to be able to know what they're called, what the island's actually called, what these people were actually referring to them as.
Right.
Clearly people were being sent on expeditions there up until 1935. And I don't know about you, but there's a few years in between 1700s and 1935. Yeah. And they're still making contact with people there. And so I find it hard to believe that a culture was dying. I personally think that the people on the island did not want to talk to the white people about their moai. So Yeah, we are probably never going to truly know. I know that some people have done radiocarbon dating. There's some estimates that they are like from the 1400 AD. I've seen other dates that say that they could be as far back as 1000 AD, up until like the 1600s. So really inconclusive. We really will probably never know the truth about the Moai, but the British Museum should send theirs back.
Yeah.
Like, I was really excited when I saw that the museum in New York has a mold of it, that it's not actually a figure. But then I saw the British Museum and I was just, my heart sank, especially seeing that they claim that the translation means stolen friend or stolen ancestor.
Right,
and I was like,
right.
do you not realize what that probably means? Because that makes no sense for them to call figures that are clearly meant to represent their ancestors stolen when they were originally there. So repatriate them, British Museum, because I know you're listening to our podcast. But I feel really passionate about these figures, and I've never really fully understood why. Like, I know a lot of kids like fixate on like Stonehenge and like, or the pyramids, but like Easter Island, that was my like,
I love that.
Tell me everything. I want to know.
I love that. So as we've already sort of mentioned, one of the characters in this movie is the like wax figure of Sacagawea. So I thought that I would share some information about her because so sometimes when we're doing a movie like this that has sort of a bunch of topics in it that we could talk about, I like to try and choose things that wouldn't come up in another movie per se. And weirdly, there's no like, at least no like widely known movie that deals with Sacagawea, which you know, maybe is for the best.
Truly.
Just had the thought, like, if it was made before a certain year, it probably wouldn't be good. But
you know, if they had made one, they probably would have had Lewis and Clark be like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon.
Okay, this is my like worst nightmare. And while we're at it, honestly, like maybe Scarlett Johansson can just play Sacagawea.
Oh God. Anyways, I am resigning from this podcast now.
Now that we've ruined everything.
That would be awful. But yeah, honestly, that feels like a 2010 like Oscar nominee. Yep.
Also, there would be some sort of romance between her and one of them.
Oh yeah, both of them actually. It's a love triangle.
It's a love triangle. But does it end like the Brothers Grimm does?
Oh no.
Okay.
Poor Sacagawea. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that's interesting that I want to sort of address up front, we typically, and I think like whenever Mac and I were both in school, we were taught to call her Sacagawea. But what's interesting is there's actually still a debate over how her name should be pronounced. There's multiple pronunciations that people use. Sacagawea is one. Sacagawea is another one. Which I believe is the actual Hidatsa language pronunciation of her name. Some people think it's a Shoshone name and not a Hidatsa name, which would make it pronounced slightly differently. Some people think it should be pronounced Sakakawea. Nobody really knows. I'm going to say Sakagawea, since I'm going to go with the Hidatsa pronunciation. But in looking this up, because I was like, oh, I want to make sure I'm saying it right. And then I was like, oh, just kidding. Who knows what's right? So I'm just going to go with what I've heard some other scholars saying. But she was essentially a diplomat, a translator, and a guide for Lewis and Clark. There is some interesting things in that, like, during a certain period of time, the Victorians like to mess everything up, but sort of during that time period, there became this myth around her that sort of made it sound like she was doing maybe a little bit more on this trip than she actually was, which is also annoying because what she was doing was wildly important, but they sort of make it sound like everyone would have died if it weren't for her, because they sort of wanted to use her for their own agendas of making this like a great American mythical figure. So there is like a weird mythology around her, but we think she was born around 1788 in what is now Idaho. And she, around the age of 12, was taken captive from her native Shoshone tribe by the Hidatsa tribe and was brought to what is now North Dakota. Around 1804, she is either purchased by or gambled away to a French-Canadian trader named Toussaint Charbonneau. He was a man who was living with the Hidatsa tribe, and he took her as one of his 2 wives because he had sort of adopted the Hidatsa practice of polygamy. He was at least 2 decades older than her. So you can guess that this maybe wasn't a great relationship for her. We don't really know much about them as a couple, though. Although I'll get to another story about him in a minute. But Lewis and Clark were commissioned by Thomas Jefferson to go exploring the land that had been acquired in the Louisiana Purchase. And so they end up camping out by the Hidatsa tribe, and they hire Charbonneau to be their guide. And they decide, because Sacagawea was pregnant at the time, that they were going to wait for her to have her baby before they left on their expedition, because they wanted her to be able to come with them. They knew that they were going to have to buy horses from the Shoshone tribe, and they thought having a member of the tribe with them would be helpful, and that also her presence was going to signal to all the tribes they met that they had peaceful intentions, because obviously a group of white men coming up to a tribe looks a bit different than a group of white men with a Native American woman and her baby. And particularly the presence of the baby, they thought would help everyone know that they were coming with peaceful intentions and they weren't a war party. And it sounds like it worked. In my research, I didn't see any, discussion of any skirmishes or anything like that. So she definitely did help them with that. But her son was born on February 11th of 1805, and he was named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. But Clark actually called him Pomp, which means firstborn in Shoshone. And that nickname kind of stuck with him. Otherwise, he was called Baptiste. But they left the encampment then on April 7th. So they, gave it a couple more months so that he wouldn't be a literal newborn. Sacagawea was around probably 16 or 17 years old. And she's the only woman in a group of about 31 men. So soon after leaving, she wins everybody's respect because their wagon, or their boat, capsizes, and Charbonneau is navigating, and he does nothing. The story is actually kind of funny. It makes him sound incredibly incompetent. But she is actually able to save a bunch of the supplies, a bunch of their papers, a bunch of their food, things that literally they couldn't have made it through this trip without, all while also having her baby and saving her baby. So, her useless husband, well done, sir. But that really did, sort of make Lewis and Clark and all the other men in the group respect her. Her knowledge of Shoshone and Hidatsa languages was incredibly important, obviously for them to be able to communicate with the tribes that they came across, but she also was very skilled at finding edible plants along the way, which helped them not, starve. And like I said before, her presence and the presence of her baby were putting everyone that they met at ease. She also was essentially tutoring Lewis and Clark about the tribes and about the land, because some of this was land that she had grown up on. When they meet the Shoshone tribe, they get a meeting with the chief, and they're sort of in the middle of the meeting, supposedly, when she, they arrive and they're doing it, and then she realizes that the chief is her brother that she's not seen since she was 12. And she apparently breaks down crying, and it's this big emotional, reunion between them. And then she basically goes right back to translating. So yeah, just an incredible woman. One thing that did make me a bit mad is that, of course, her husband received payment for his work on this trip. She did not.
Of course not.
But we will get to the things that Clark did for her after the trip later. But they reached the Pacific Ocean on November 15th of 1805. And after wintering at this fort that they build there, which she helps them pick the location for, the group splits into two. And Sacagawea goes with Clark She and Clark were incredibly close friends from the records of them. And in March of 1806, they leave to go through the Rocky Mountains. So at the end of the expedition, Clark essentially offers to adopt Pomp, her son, and to take him back to St. Louis. And he's about 2 years old at the time. So Sacagawea and Charbonneau say, no, he's too young, but, you know, we'll keep that in mind. Because Clark has said, you know, he'll pay for his education. He'll make sure he gets the best of everything, essentially. 3 years later, we don't know why, but 3 years later, Sacagawea and Charbonneau come to St. Louis to essentially deliver Pomp to Clark. And Clark does, you know, raise him and sends him to school. He goes to Europe. Now, it's from here that things get a little muddy. We know that Charbonneau goes and works for a fur trading company and that she goes with him. But we think she dies in December of 1812 from typhus. The issue is that it's listed as a wife of Charbonneau, and it's possible it was a different wife of his. There are some oral histories that indicate that maybe she actually lived until 1884, but those also like aren't really definitive on it. So if she did die in 1812, she would have been about 24 years old. What we do know is that she had given birth to a baby girl named Lisette in 1812. We don't really know anything that happens to her except for the fact that after Sacagawea's death, both Pomp and Lisette, Clark becomes their legal guardian. So I don't really know what happens with Charbonneau, that he brings their other child to Clark as well. But Clark does raise both of them, educates them, and you know, at least with Pomp we know, essentially sees him as his own. We don't really know what happens to the daughter, though. But I thought that was really fascinating because I'd never actually heard that about the fact that this baby, who became kind of a celebrity because, you know, obviously Lewis and Clark became quite famous, and here's this baby that's in all these drawings and stuff, who'd been on this expedition, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever even thought to look up anything about the child.
Right? But I just think that is really fascinating, this idea that Clark offered to, you know, give him an education. And I think particularly when you think about the fact that, because, yeah, at first I was like, oh, that's kind of weird, like white guys, you know, taking away this Native woman's child. But then it occurs to me that she is married to this white man in a marriage that she probably had no say in. No. Living with a tribe that she was, you know, kidnapped by, essentially. So she was maybe more than happy to hand over her kid to Clark, who she, by all means, it seems like had a very close friendship with. So yeah, I obviously we learned about her in school. Never learned any of that. So that was definitely some new information for me.
Definitely. Obviously with a movie like this, much like with National Treasure, there's not really a lot to say about costumes. Obviously there are a lot of costumes, but I think that this show was probably incredibly easy to costume because all you have to do is look at the museum exhibits and basically replicate them because they're very close. They're not obviously the same, but very similar to what's actually at the museum. So, you know, there really wasn't a lot of... Yeah, it was easy enough. I would estimate that this was an easy show to costume. The costumes were done by Renee April, who's a very well-known costume designer. She did not, however, return for the later two films. She is... I have the wrong movie name written down here, but I know what I'm saying. She has done costuming for Blade Runner, 2049, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, and my least favorite movie, The Fountain, which I accidentally wrote in my notes the favorite because I also don't like that movie.
Well, The Lightning Thief is one of my least favorite movies. So. Yes,
that's why I included it, because I was like, I know Nicole does not like this movie. But yeah, so she did The Fountain, which is a not good film. Which literally, anytime I see a movie that I don't like, I'm always like, well, at least it wasn't The Fountain. Oh, so if you know, that is my baseline, like the very bottom.
Is that what you thought when we watched The Great Wall?
Yeah, truly. Look, I know I've actually encountered somebody who said that one of their favorite movies was The Fountain.
I thought you were going to say The Great Wall, and I was like, they were lying.
No, The Fountain. And I was like, well, I mean, I respect you as a person, but I do not respect that opinion. If listeners have never seen The Fountain, it is a movie that has Hugh Jackman, and I believe Rachel Weisz is the woman in it. And basically, if you've seen that gif of Hugh Jackman where he's like bald and like looking like he's having a moment, like he's in all white and he's got a beard and he's bald and he's like looking up at the sky, and it's like it's a weird gif. People use it for like shock and awe. Yeah, it's from that movie, and basically he like makes out with a tree for like an hour and a half.
Oh.
I saw that movie when it first came out in theaters, Thanksgiving Day. My cousin and I immediately came back and started making what I believe would now be considered like a vlog. This was before vlogs were really a thing. We like took my camcorder and basically sat for an hour and talked about how terrible the movie was and making jokes. We never posted it anywhere, and I have no idea where this footage is. But like very early like YouTube rage before, you know, that became a thing to rage about films after watching them. But yeah, terrible movie. When I saw that she did the costumes for that, I lost a little bit of respect for her. I'm joking. Just because that movie is just, it's a mess. But she did a really good job on Night at the Museum. I think all of the costumes look really good. They match so many of the, you know, exhibits. I particularly like Sacagawea's outfit, and I really like Teddy's, and I like what was done with the Roman centurions and with the whole little Wild West village. Fun, inspired, very kid-friendly. It's a good time. I mean, there's not really a lot to say about the costumes on a movie like this. Like, there's not even really a lot to say about, like, Rami Malek's costume, because, like, it's very stereotypical pharaoh garb.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of standard.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very standard movie. You know, why, you know, reinvent the wheel when it's already there?
Yeah.
You know what I'm excited for? I know I just talked about a movie that I did not like, but you know what I'm excited for?
What are you
I'm excited for our next double feature.
Yeah, we have a very exciting double feature coming in August, one that we've been planning for literally months.
Months. Like, both of us nervous about movie dates changing and ruining our plans, but our plans have not been ruined, and I'm very excited for our double feature.
Do we want to tell? Or
should we do spoilers?
Should we?
Yeah.
Should we? Okay, no. We're not going to spoil it. We're going to say we're doing a double feature of 2 films with the same lead actor, one of which is in theaters right now.
And one of which was referenced in Night at the Museum.
Yep, and which came out last year?
End of last year.
It's one that got messed up because of the pandemic. I feel like it came out in the UK and then came out in the US like much later. But
there's a t-shirt that references both of them at Super Yaki right now. Yeah,
so if you're listening to this before the next episode has come out and you want to take a guess what our double feature is, do let us know. They are both actually period dramas. We're going back to talking about period dramas.
Yes.
Or, well, yeah, they're period films. One's technically, I guess, a period fantasy, but
yeah.
But we're very excited. Well, thank you so much for listening to our 29th episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. This episode is also a good time to share that I'm going back to school. In the month of August, I'm going to be starting grad school in a public history master's program, which essentially means I will be training to work in a museum. Hence, I thought this was a good time to talk about that.
She said, I've been inspired.
Yeah, I will not be a night guard at a museum. And
hey, it pays $11.50 an hour.
You know, don't knock it. But our episodes will continue as normal, no change, so no worries there. But I'm hoping that I might be able to bring some of what I'm learning to the podcast. Obviously, I'm specializing in museum studies, but beyond that, I'm going to be sort of trying to do a lot of work to do with different forms of sort of minority history, African American history, Native history, and women's history. So hopefully we can find some fun films to tie into some of the stuff that I'm studying, because that I think would be a good use of the reading I will already be doing. Yeah, so that's very exciting and hopefully good news for this podcast.
I'm very excited. We'd love to hear from you over on social media and to hear what you think of Night at the Museum.
Are you also Jedidah and Octavius super fans?
Yes.
Let us know. You can find us at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Maggie over at Maggie of the Town, and you can find me at Nicole Ackman 16.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Airglue Media website, and Audible. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating over on Apple Podcast or on Podchaser. Every few episodes, we'll be reading our reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured.
We'll be back soon with another episode as we continue to look at period films and sometimes other films from a history and film perspective. Until then, stay safe and healthy and have a great summer.
And put your mask back on again. You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
You know, if they had made one, they probably would have had Lewis and Clark be like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon.